Kenya will not be naming the winner of the country's presidential election today. The chairperson of the Commission, Wafula Chebukati, has said Chebukati said in a press briefing this afternoon that provisional voter turnout stood at 14.1 million voters, or 65.4%. Now, Kenyans went to the polls on Tuesday to elect a president, as well as representatives to Parliament and the county assemblies.
The Commission has 7 days, as per the Constitution, to complete this exercise, but we shall undertake to finish it as soon as possible once all the returning officers bring the documents to the National Tallying Center. But from the kits that transmitted, the voter turnout is 65.4%. This figure will go higher once we compute the verification of the turnout in areas that did manual voting.
All right, to get a bit of reaction of how the polls have gone, we're now joined by Irungu Houghton, who's the Executive Director for Amnesty International in Kenya. Irungu, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program. It looks like it's still a tight race, but before we get to that, before the election, we spoke about the fear and the potential for violence. The candidates have been saying the right things, and it looks as if up until now it's been relatively peaceful. But we know that traditionally, that if anything happens, usually is post the fact. What's your sense about this election? Are there still causes for concern?
So yes, I mean, I think the pre-election period has been a fairly peaceful period. We lost 5 lives, unfortunately, but much fewer than before. We've seen a number of assaults of journalists, and a number of women candidates were trolled online and verbally attacked in meetings. But on the whole, generally, the primaries have gone fairly uneventful in terms of human rights violations. But of course, this is the dangerous moment, the moment in which the election results begin to stream in, and candidates either mobilize their supporters to accept defeat or to essentially challenge the decision making. So I think we're in this, very, I guess, twilight zone of most African elections. And I guess just to say, Peter, this is one of the most watched elections we've ever had. There are 70 international observer missions in town, just basically ensuring that it is a free and fair election.
All right. There were a few issues with the electronic verification system, but by and large, do you think that all things being equal, that this election will deliver a fair result?
It's too early to tell again on that one. I think what we have noticed is, very low voter turnout. So before the polls opened, 4 million Kenyans who were eligible to register as voters chose not to vote. And therefore, we went into the polls expecting 85% of the 22.1 million Kenyans, that's about just under half of the population, that they would come out and vote. And what we've seen, essentially 65% turned out. And therefore, there's lots of questions about why, the 4 million primarily young voters, why they didn't join. And of the ones that did register to vote, something like 60% of the voters register are over the age of 35, which in many countries in North Europe and so on would not be a matter of concern. But for Kenya, 75% of the population is between 18 and 35. So there are questions about why young people did not, first of all, register, but secondly, why they didn't come out and vote yesterday. So I think that's the first concern that we've got. But having said that, administratively, the elections have gone relatively well. We have seen a number of physical and violent incidents. A member of parliament shot the aide of his opponent. We've seen 2 very prominent politicians fight in public with their supporters, but these incidents are probably in the range of about 15 and 20 rather than widespread. So we really wait for the next couple of days to see what the results will generate. And having said that, whether they will be accepted or immediately disputed, both in courts in the High Court, but also in the Court of Public Opinion.
All right, so how far into the counting are we now? What sort of percentage in terms of the polling stations having submitted their results?
Yeah, so maybe I should mention that, this is probably a fairly transparent election by Kenyan standards. We've got not just the Electoral Commission tallying, but we've also got independent media doing the same thing almost simultaneously. And we have 4 or 5 media houses doing their own tally. This has caused confusion among Kenyans because the speed and the accuracy of the tallying is not uniform, as different media houses have different capacities. But I think the benefit of this is that it will be very difficult to call an election and not have a number of media stations also doing this. And of course, the political parties are doing this. I suspect we've got another 2 days of counting to go before we are able to essentially close this. But even as we wait for the presidential results, which are being counted first, we've seen a number of parliamentary candidates be knocked out. Veteran politicians, people with large followings seem to have lost their constituencies in this election moment. So there are a lot of upsets, particularly in the Mount Kenya region, the traditional, historically stronghold area of the outgoing Uhuru Kenyatta.
I believe that there's quite a large contingency of diasporan Kenyans, that it could make up as much as 25% of the vote. How significant is this number? Is it split between the two, or does it favor one more than the other?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just to mention, we've got close to, by different standards, between 1 and 2 million is the figure that we usually hear. 2 million diasporan Kenyans in this election, and just to add, for example, that they are extremely important economically. Last year, we saw about $340 million worth of investment through remittances. So this is an important economic constituency for us. But they have had the opportunity in 12 countries to be able to vote in these elections. But the number of registered voters are very low. It's, I think, somewhere in the range of about 10,000 voters registered, or rather 10,000 people registered to vote in this election. And therefore, it is not a significant figure. And of course, doesn't affect all 6 levels of government. It just affects the presidential vote. But 10,000 votes is about the size of a ward or a sub-county in Kenya. It's not a significant national figure, but I think important symbolically and critical to keep the confidence of Kenyans in the diaspora in the political process in Kenya.
Could this be the closest race in Kenyan politics?
It's, again, difficult to tell right now, but it is extremely tight at the moment. I mean, many Kenyans are glued to their television screens. You can see mine on the back there. We've not been able to turn it off all day because the numbers just keep fluctuating up and down by 1 or 2%. And there are some people essentially saying that this election could be determined by 2 or 3, perhaps 5% difference, or 200,000 votes in a context in which we've seen 16 million people come to vote. So it is very close.
We've talked about young people not showing up to vote. What's been the situation for women? Because sadly, Kenya has a terrible record in terms of women getting a chance, to sit and be represented. But one gets a sense, and this is what we've been hearing, that the Martha Karua factor may have upped the game for women in general.
Well, this was what the opinion polls had predicted, that we would see that at that point, I think when she was nominated, when she was appointed, we had something like about a 7 to 14% undecided set of undecided voters, and that this would be a substantial constituency to essentially win over. It's not clear at the moment because I don't think we've had the opportunity to break down the votes in terms of gender, but I think one of the things that is really clear is that we've seen some early wins by a number of women, including some very young women, which is encouraging. I'm not sure at this stage whether we will meet our constitutional threshold of 2/3 for any constitutional office, but, or the parliament for that matter. But we are definitely seeing some upsets by young women candidates, which is exciting. It's particularly important because the Federation of International Women Lawyers documented 740 incidences of verbal attacks, trolling, and physical assaults of women candidates. So for the candidates who continue to right to the end and were on the ballot paper, we just have to admire their courage and their commitment to make sure that Kenya is a gender equal nation quicker rather than later.
All right. As somebody who works with Amnesty International, what are you watching out for in the next few days and the next week or so?
Well, our mandate obviously is, the protection of human beings, and we have a number of monitors across the country, and they're monitoring for violence both from the police service and from civilians. And it's important to note that as yet we've not had a fatality that can be attributed to the National Police Service. There are 150,000 police officers that have been mobilized for this exercise. It's one of the biggest deployments in our history. It is so critical that they are, they exercise restraint, that they don't use excessive force, and that they de-escalate situations between opposing supporters. But I think we are on standby to make sure that if there's any unlawful use of force, we will condemn it and we will seek the arrests of individual officers. And if it involves commanding officers, we will ask for their arrest as well. The country has a number of helplines, call centers, and therefore I think it would be very easy for Kenyans to basically point out where police officers have disgraced their uniform and not upheld the rule of law, but have actually violated human rights. So that's what we are focusing on in the next few days, if not the next few weeks.
All right. Irungu, always great talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, that's Amnesty International's Irungu Houghton speaking to us about the Kenyan elections, a very tight race at the moment. Too close to call, as they say in politics, but it's so true when it comes to Kenya. So no results today, and I suspect it's probably going to take a few more days before we find out who the next president of Kenya is.